Okay. We had technical difficulties. The internet interrupted for a second and it ended the live stream. So I'll wait if more viewers will join. And if somebody rejoins this live stream, please post your questions in the chat section. I will ask the admin to repost those questions in the previous video from the previous live stream that got interrupted unexpectedly. So I see that we have 5 viewers. Again, admin, if you can, please repost those questions. Again, let me just, and I will try to answer as much as I can. There were many questions that were unanswered when the stream was interrupted. Okay, I have one question posted there. Thank you for asking. What is the longest pending asylum you have come across? Yes, the stream was disrupted. Yes, and thank you very much for reposting your question, Katie. The longest asylum case, I think I had a case from Ethiopia. Well, no, it was a case from Somalia, and it was, I think it lasted about 10 years until the interview was scheduled. It was a successful case at the end, but no, it was from Sudan. I apologize. It was not from Somalia. It was from Sudan. And that case lasted about 10 years until the interview was scheduled, and eventually was successful. It was approved, but there was a long wait. Now, in terms of generally having a case in immigration court, I had a case that was lasting for more than 13 years. We made a post recently about that case. It took about 13 years until we had the individual hearing in the case. But we have quarterly meetings with the asylum division, USCIS asylum division director. And one of those meetings, the division director notified us that there was a case from 1993 that was pending, and I believe it was last year that we had, or the year before last. So that case was pending since 1993. Thankfully, it wasn't one of my cases. But again, guys, please, if you can repost your questions, I will be grateful. The previous video, the previous stream, unfortunately interrupted abruptly because of the internet downage briefly. The Wi-Fi was down, and that's why it interrupted. I cannot see those questions that you previously posted. If you can repost it in the chat section, I will answer as much as I can. But I'll tell you, until I see any next questions, I will tell you about, other things. For example, preparing for asylum interview and what are the massive asylum, most frequent asylum interview mistakes that I observe during the asylum interviews. I think the most frequent mistake that people make in asylum interviews is not giving complete, detailed answers to the questions. What I mean by that is that many asylum applicants, obviously, they come from different cultures. And in some cultures, when a question is asked, the answer begins without answering directly to the question, but begins with telling a story or starting from the beginning, and then by the end of the answer, the applicant forgets the actual, specific of the question. So don't do that. When the immigration officer, asylum officer asks you a question, or immigration judge asks you a question, or the government attorney in immigration court asks you a question, make sure you give brief and complete answer to the question, and make sure you first answer the question before you provide any kind of explanation. So for example, if it's a yes or no question, your first answer should be yes or no, and then you can tag along with any explanations that you want to provide. So do not start your answer to a question during your asylum interview or at your asylum hearing with explanation. That's one of the biggest mistakes. The other mistake I see during the asylum interviews is sometimes applicants changing their stories or changing the answer to the question just because they thought maybe if I answer it one way or another, it's going to help or be better for the case. The asylum officers and the government attorneys in immigration courts are very well trained. And as soon as they see any discrepancy between your written declaration and your oral testimony, they will immediately hold on to that and they'll keep asking you questions until you're confused or until you basically admit that you made something up and so on. So first of all, be honest, be truthful, and if you find a mistake in your declaration, do have an explanation. If at the point when you're at the interview you realize that, oh, it was written differently, or if the officer notices that the issue in the discrepancy between your written asylum story and what you're saying at your interview, don't panic, don't be alarmed. If you have an explanation, provide an explanation, be patient, and explain why you made a mistake, why it was written differently in your asylum declaration. Now, before your asylum interview, before your testimony in immigration court and in your asylum interview, you will have an opportunity to make any changes to your asylum application and declaration. Now, it doesn't mean that you have a blank check to change everything, because every change, if it's material change, you will have to explain it. You will be questioned, but why did you first say this, or why did you write this and now you're changing your story? So be careful with that. But if there is a mistake you made in your written declaration or in your asylum application, and now you realize that the answer is different, then make sure to change that. Do not hold until the government attorney or the asylum officer brings it up, because then you are put in defensive. So affirmatively explain that there was this mistake, or I want to change this because of this, that, and explain why. All right. So thank you everyone for posting your questions, and I will answer as many questions as possible. Please post it in the chat section. Again, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. So I'll go to the next question. Thank you again for reposting some of the questions that were lost from the previous stream. All right. Hello, sir. What are the common questions? Okay, so the question is, what are the common questions in the asylum case, in either asylum interview or in immigration court? There are no common questions. There are general, category of questions are, number one, the officer is going to go through your application and ask you all of the biographical information during your asylum interview. Obviously, in immigration court, your attorney will be asking you those questions to kind of give biographical background of you to the immigration judge. But in terms of the questions, every officer is different. In asylum interview, some of the officers ask you open-ended question after going through the forms. They say, why did you apply for asylum? Now, one of the mistakes I see that is that you should not give start telling your story answering this question. Although the question may be open-ended, may sound open-ended, the officer is asking, why did you apply for asylum? It's not inviting you to tell your entire story or, recite your declaration. So do not study your declaration to be able to memorize it, to recite it at your asylum interview or an immigration court. That's not impressive. That actually will hurt your case. So if the officer is asking, why did you apply for asylum in the United States, you have to still give a brief, concise answer. So the best asylum interview is when the officer asks you a brief question, you give the brief answer. So it's back and forth, question, answer, So do not tell long stories. So in answering, for example, to the question, why did you apply for asylum? You may say, because I'm afraid to return to my country. And that gives the officer an opportunity. It gives the opening. The officer is going to now say, why are you afraid? Or who are you afraid of? I'm afraid of, this group, or I'm afraid of the government or the authorities or the police in my country. What do you think they will do to you? So this opens the question. So even though the first question, why did you apply for asylum, may sound like an open-ended question asking, inviting you to tell your story, do not just make sure you're prepared to give the brief, correct, and on-point answer to those questions. But as I said, to answer your question, Mr. Destal, there is no common questions asked. Every asylum officer is different. I've had asylum officers who were very brief, just going through the questions briefly, and those are usually the best officers. And some of the officers, they go through the interview and they come up with the new questions, and they ask confusing questions or lengthy questions. And that's the importance of having your asylum lawyer represent you in your asylum interview, is to make sure that those confusing questions are clarified, and that if there is anything that is not clear, then the asylum lawyer, your immigration lawyer, can interrupt and can interject and clarify the question, or ask the officer to explain what they mean by this question. All right, so the next question, Ismail, can we get the date early than the date scheduled? Yes, if you have, and by that I assume you mean date scheduled for individual hearing in immigration court, or master hearing in immigration court. Because if you have your interview scheduled in an asylum office, then it's already early. So you're not going to get anything earlier than that. You should be grateful to have already scheduled interview, and that usually about 2-3 weeks out, or maybe slightly more. But in terms of immigration court, yes. So as I said, your immigration lawyer can file a motion to advance your individual hearing. Your immigration lawyer can be creative, can contact the clerk of the judge to kind of ask questions whether there is a window, maybe there is a cancellation or anything where the hearing can be scheduled earlier. Your immigration lawyer can ask the judge at the master hearing to schedule it as soon as possible, be willing to take the earliest possible date. Sometimes they have a window, they have a cancellation. Even if the regular individual hearings are scheduled years into the future, then you may get much earlier date. I'll give you an example. I had I had an asylum hearing for a client of mine who was scheduled about 3 years out. And with the same judge, I had another client who had individuals hearing scheduled about 3 months later. So it so happened that the client who wanted their hearing earlier was the one who was scheduled 3 years out. The other one, who was 3 months out, didn't necessarily want their case to be heard as soon as possible, because they were going through possible marriage with a U.S. citizen, and they were considering maybe that's going to work out. Then it will be easier, rather than risking, order of removal if they are not granted asylum. So what I did is I contacted the clerk of the judge, and I told them about these two hearings. I said, how about we swap them? Is that okay? Can we do that? And the clerk confirmed, and the judge agreed, and we filed the motion in both cases. And basically we swapped those two cases, where one of the hearings, which was 3 years out, was heard much earlier. And the same thing can be done with other attorneys. We, the members of American Immigration Lawyers Association, we have different ways of communication. We do through either listserv or via emails, and sometimes that's also possible to coordinate with other attorneys to see if somebody has a case where their client is not, doesn't want their hearing to be heard by this specific judge so early, and then they can swap the hearings with the client who wants their case to be heard early. And the other trick we use, it's not trick, it's basically a tool we use, is we waive master hearings where the clients want their individual hearings to be held earlier, scheduled earlier. Then what we do is we file written pleadings. Basically, written pleadings mean all of the communications that would take place in the master hearing, we file it in the form or in the written form with the immigration court, and we ask the judge to waive the master hearing and schedule individual hearing as soon as possible. And sometimes we have cases where the master hearing is scheduled 2 years out, and we ask to waive and schedule individual hearing, and we get a date within 2 weeks. I had a case with 2 weeks. Unfortunately, in that case, the government attorney didn't have their file so early. We had to reschedule it. I think it was about 2 months or so later that we had the individual hearing. It was a very interesting case for an investigative journalist who suffered significant persecution. In the end, the judge granted asylum just on a humanitarian basis because the country conditions in that country significantly changed, and we had a great expert who was willing to testify. It was a very successful case, very interesting case, and we did get the grant. But as I said, that master hearing was supposed to be held about, I believe, 2 years later. We filed for a waiver of master hearing and asked to schedule individual hearing, and we got a notice of the individual hearing within the next 2 weeks. So that happens too, but generally, we do like to waive master hearings. That saves time for the courts, and that saves time for us, although sometimes it can be scheduled on a date and time when I'm not available. Then I file another request to reschedule it and coordinate with the clerk. So the answer is yes, there are ways to get the earlier dates in immigration courts. Your immigration lawyer should be able to do that and give you all these different options. And there is expedite request. There is a general motion to advance that can be filed with explanation why this case should be put earlier than everybody else because of whatever the emergency is. It may be the family separation. You may have immediate family members abroad, and your case is stuck and you want your case to be heard earlier, and that is a convincing basis. Or there may be medical reasons or other humanitarian reasons where the judge would entertain the motion to advance your hearing. All right, so next question. Again, please post your questions in the chat section. I will answer as many questions as I can before we end this stream. Our previous stream was unfortunately interrupted because of the internet being down briefly, and we had to restart this. So if you posted a question in the previous stream, please repost it here. If you have any questions, post it here in the chat section. The previous live stream will be also posted on YouTube, and I believe it already appears there. You might want to listen to that too, because I go through the steps for applying for asylum and important points on how to prepare your asylum application, and most importantly, how to draft your asylum declaration. I will make a separate video about that as well. I think that could be a separate live stream where we could discuss the asylum declaration, how to write it, what to do, what not to do, the format and so on, and the importance of properly prepared asylum declaration, which is also known as asylum story. So many people call it story. We call it, in our practice, we call it asylum declaration or statement in support. All right, so the next question. I have asylum pending and want to speed up my case. I am from Syria. I have 2 of my brothers killed in Syria by the army, and we were displaced from our homes in the countryside of Damascus, Idlib. Thank you very much for your question, and I'm very sorry for your loss. The conditions in Syria are horrible, and it's still horrible, and I don't think it gets enough media attention. Obviously there is a war in Ukraine, and that also deserves a lot of attention, and there are horrible atrocities, and it's not coincidence that many of the atrocities in Syria were also caused and are being caused by Russia, similar as in Ukraine. But we have a lot of clients from Syria. I'm very familiar with this country conditions and situation in Syria. So, you know, you obviously have a strong case. You know, obviously, again, unfortunately, your brothers were killed in Syria by the army, and you were displaced from home, and you have asylum case pending, and you want to speed up the case. But to speed up the case, if it's affirmative asylum case, the first step is not to just request to speed up the case. The first step is to make sure that your asylum application is full and complete. What I mean by that, if you filed your asylum application and you didn't have, you didn't provide evidence and support, you didn't provide witness statements, if you didn't have your complete declaration, your story submitted with it. So the first step to speed up your case is to get that prepared diligently and properly. And as you file it, the asylum offices, they have email addresses, and you can email all your updated declaration, updated form, and information to the asylum office. As you do that, and that's when it's the best time to request to expedite your case, and describing the conditions, the situation. Maybe you have some other family members left there, but you can ask to expedite, to schedule your interview as soon as possible. It's one thing to say, schedule my interview as soon as possible, and the asylum office sees that you only have the application, you don't have much evidence, you don't have declaration, then they're not motivated to schedule it, because once they schedule it, you're probably not going to have enough time to submit all that, or maybe you're not going to submit all that. So if you have a diligent asylum lawyer in your case, that's one motivation for the asylum office to schedule your interview, because they know that you're going to be prepared. They're not going to waste their interview time by having you scheduled and then you come in with no documents or unprepared. Then they have to reschedule it, or they have to clog the immigration courts by referring your case there. So the number one, again, rule for making sure that your case is reviewed faster is to have complete application with your declaration, documents, evidence submitted from the beginning. And if you didn't do that already, and if you have pending asylum case, it's not too late. Do it now. Do it now and request for early interview as soon as possible. Some asylum offices have short lists where you can ask them to shortlist your case, where they can call you for an interview, within short notice, such as like 2 weeks or 1 week. In the past, I've had asylum officers call me on my cell phone and tell me, hey, I have an opening, 3 days from now. Do you want to take it? Because somebody canceled their interview, or they left the country, or they withdrew their case. But not as much of that is going on now as it used to. But still, there's short notice lists that you can ask them to list you. All right, the next question is, Ismail, what if I cannot retrieve medical recordings? I guess it means records, but I have scars on my body from torture or beating. Can it be used as proof? Yes, of course it can be used, and it's beautiful proof. It's unfortunate, but it's one of the, evidence for asylum cases is something. It's a major topic, and I'm due to make a video. I have a video that I made, a separate video. I think it's about 30 minutes video about talking about how to gather evidence, or what kind of evidence to use for asylum, how to be creative about evidence. It doesn't have to be direct evidence. It can be circumstantial evidence and so on. But I'll tell you this way. Any visual evidence is sometimes a lot more important than documentary evidence. So, you have photographs, you have scars. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not a direct evidence. You have a scar, and you have, you show a scar to the judge really on your body. That helps, but it doesn't mean that it's from, whatever you're claiming it from, that the government did this, or you were tortured and so on. But at least it provides corroborating evidence. It's visual. You didn't make this up. I always bring an example. I had a client who. I always bring this example when somebody tells me, oh, I don't have documents, medical records, and so on. I had a client who applied for asylum, and part of his story, in one of the countries of the former Soviet Union, in many of the countries of the former Soviet Union, it is a kind of pattern that the government authorities, police, they, as trophies from persecuting political figures, or somebody who has political opinions or oppositionists, as a trophy, they take their cars, because the cars are really expensive in those countries. Something that costs $50,000 in the United States may cost $100,000 in those countries. So, usually what happens is the government authorities order the operatives, the local police, and so on, to target certain individual because that individual is too vocal or has political opinions that they are openly expressing. But those police officers, they're fed not by the salary, the miserable salaries they get, but they do ransom. They ask for ransom to let somebody go after being detained, or they seize their properties and so on. So in this case, this client came to me and he had a car who was seized by those police officers. And the way they seized it is actually they took him to the notary public, which in those countries, the sale of the car have to be formalized by the notary public. They took this client to notary public and made him to sign there under duress that he is basically selling this car for this vehicle for a minor amount of money. And he didn't have any documents proving any of this. The only thing we found was a registration, a copy of registration for his car, which was old Mercedes, and a relative of his was able to email a scanned copy of that registration document. Now, that registration document did not mean that this car was really seized from him. He was forced to give it out to these individuals or sell it or donate it to these individuals. But it corroborated the fact that he did have this type of car, which he says was taken away from him because of his political opinion and so on. And that helped. That helped a lot. We got asylum through asylum office. He didn't have, believe me, he didn't have medical records. He didn't have police reports or anything of that nature, but his story corroborated with the fact. I mean, the registration for this car corroborated with the facts that he described in his story, and that convinced the officer that he was credible, that he was telling the truth. So yes, if you have scars from injuries that were caused to you, you don't have medical records, you can use those scars. If those scars are in visible areas of your body, you can actually show it to the judge or asylum officer. But it's also a good idea for the record to always make a picture, photograph, and put it in the record. You can do both. You can show it and you can include the photograph of the scars. The other thing about medical records, I do want, and not many people think about this. Let's say you had an injury, you had a broken rib, or you had something that happened to you in your home country because you were tortured, you were beaten up, or something happened, or you had some serious damage to your body. It was hard, or it was impossible to get medical records from the country where this happened to you, because many times the hospitals or whoever treated you, or maybe you didn't have treatment, but many times they're government employees, or they're afraid to provide any of those records, or maybe it's mismanaged. But it's not late to do that even in the United States. So you can go and get examined, and a doctor or an MRI can confirm that you had a fracture at one point because there is some calcification. Now we're going into the medical explanation of this. But if you're claiming that you had a serious fracture from this, whatever happened to you in your home country, and now it healed because it was many years ago, but still a medical examination here can reveal, you can get a medical record here confirming the issue you had, whatever injury you had in the past, or maybe it still has lingering effects. So, and that's part of being creative when you are gathering evidence for your asylum case. It's not just medical records or police reports from your home country, but it's also something you can gather here in the United States and prove after the fact. All right, the next question. I have applied for asylum and my 150 days passed, but I don't have court date yet. Is there anything else I can do for that? So if your case is not in immigration court yet, you don't have to do much. It will eventually be there. You filed your asylum, I assume, affirmatively with the USCIS. If your case is not in immigration court, you couldn't file it with the immigration court. Or if your case is in court, but there is no court date yet, you did file your asylum application, you can file, or you or your lawyer can file a motion to set your individual hearing. And you're going to file a motion to waive master hearing. If your case is in immigration court, but there is no master hearing, you can still file written pleadings with a motion to set the master hearing. Now, if you have a case in court, that's truly the time when I say that you must have a lawyer, because you have you will have really difficult time navigating through asylum case in immigration court. Although there is nothing in the United States requiring anyone to hire a lawyer for anything, just like there's nothing requiring you to hire an engineer to build a house or architect. There is a famously known woman who watched the YouTube videos and built a house for herself. Yes, there are those exceptional circumstances. But you do hire an engineer, an architect to build a house because you don't want the roof to fall off on your head and cause you serious injuries, or you don't have to do a surgery on yourself because you may cause serious injury or death. So similarly, when you have a life-changing event such as your immigration court proceedings, deciding whether you're going to be deported or you'll live in the United States and your family is going to live here, it's probably the time you should consider hiring a lawyer, and that lawyer can help you to navigate through getting your court date, whether you should wait for that, where you should file asylum application with court or the asylum office, or whether you should waive your master hearing, set the individual hearing, and file a motion. All right, I apply with all documents, but until now I don't have a court date yet, and I have. Okay, so I'm really worried about the court. Okay, that's the same question. I understand, sir, but as I said, get a lawyer at least consult with a lawyer. I'll be happy to help you. You can always go to the links provided here and schedule a consultation directly with me in my calendar. All right, I think that's the last question I see in the chat section. I will wait another minute or two if anybody has any questions. I know the previous live stream, we started at 5 p.m. Washington, D.C. time, and it's 6:18. We've been going on for 1 hour and 18 minutes, but the previous live stream was unfortunately interrupted because of the internet being down, but it's back up now. So, before hanging up, I do want to give a chance if anybody has any other questions. And please post your questions in the chat section. Please also like this video and subscribe to our channel to be informed about our next streams. Now, what I try to do is have live streams every Thursday, and I believe for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I will have availability at the same time, 5 p.m. Eastern, Washington, D.C., New York time, on Thursdays. Next Thursday and the Thursday after, we will announce the topic beforehand. But again, this is a chance to ask as many questions as you want. You don't have to schedule a consultation to be able to ask questions from me during these live streams in the chat section. Okay, so the last question I have is, will suing the USCIS negatively impact my asylum case? Of course, the last question has to be as complicated as it is. It's a very good question. Is the officer knows that I'm suing? Well, they're not going to tell you they know you're suing or not. In theory, it should not affect your case. So first, let's break it down, what suing USCIS means. So if your asylum case has been pending for years, you haven't had your interview scheduled, what it means is that the USCIS is not doing what is mandated to do by the regulations, because the regulations say that the asylum office, the USCIS, has to schedule your interview within 45 days, and you have to get a decision within 2 weeks. But they don't, because of the backlogs, because of the mismanagement and limited budget and so on and so forth. But that doesn't matter. So as an applicant for asylum, you can file an action in federal court, which is known as mandamus action, basically asking the federal court to order the USCIS to review a case, because you as a plaintiff, you're claiming that this government, this agency of the US government, is not doing their job that they're mandated to do. That's where the name is mandamus action comes from. So in doing so, you're suing the US federal agency, the USCIS, in a federal court. What it does in practice, you're not going to have a trial, most likely. Your lawyer is going to file this mandamus action in federal court. It will give 30 days for the US government to answer. And so the US attorney will have to file an answer with the court. And then your attorney is going to file a discovery and so on and so forth. Or even before they file an answer, the US attorney is going to contact the USCIS, the federal agency. The federal attorney for the US government is going to contact them and tell them, okay, let's just go ahead and schedule an interview for this guy, or take action on the case because they filed a lawsuit. We have a lot to deal with. So in reality, you're not going to have really federal court hearing and so on. You may, I'm not saying it's not possible, you may have a full-blown litigation. The government may try to defend, and some of the cases they do. But in most of the cases, you file this case, your lawyer files it. It's not a cheap process, it's expensive. And at the end of the day, USCIS schedules your interview. But in some cases, and I've seen those cases where the clients came to me after the case was referred to immigration court, their cases were basically, they didn't have interviews. So the USCIS abruptly, in response to this mandamus action, referred their case to immigration court without an interview. Now, those clients were asking me, should we now sue the USCIS again for not giving me the interview and so on? Yes, maybe you can sue them, but then you go into this litigation again. You're fighting against the federal government, which has federal agency, USCIS, which has this wide discretion to give you asylum or not. In theory, they don't. If you deserve asylum, you should get asylum. But this USCIS office, the director of this office, asylum office, this asylum officer, in practice, they have a wide discretion. They have, it's limited, but it's not as limited as it should be, discretion, because there is a lot of human factor involved in deciding asylum cases. So, whether the officer will know, yes, they may know. Whether this asylum office will know, of course they will know, because when you're suing USCIS, you're going to be suing this specific asylum office that is reviewing your case, and the director of that office is going to be one of the defendants. And the asylum officer works for that director of the office, so they probably talk among each other. So I'm not saying they do that one way or another specifically. They have this scheme, let's punish those that sue us. But I've seen cases where they did, it was obvious, where they simply didn't schedule an interview. They just referred the case to the immigration court. So this guy wasted probably 5,000 to 10,000 in getting all this lawsuit and all that. And I don't know how much exactly different other attorneys charge for mandamus actions, but in the end, he actually hurt himself by getting his case referred to immigration court for deportation proceedings, even without an opportunity for an asylum interview that they deserved. So it's a question of if, and it's a question of how strong is your case. If you're very confident about your case, if you have very strong case, then I usually say, yes, it's worth to try to sue the government. And it doesn't necessarily refer only to asylum cases. Any immigration case you have, if the government is unreasonably delaying your case, you have this right to file a lawsuit against the government, and that usually does push your case forward, but you may be irritating them. It doesn't mean that you're going to get approval. And if they had a choice or discretion approving or not approving your case, you're probably going to be on the negative side of that equation. So I hope this answers your question. and I see that somebody posted there, they probably mark you in their files as a problem applicant. Kent, bummer. Kent, I wouldn't think they would mark. I think that would turn into a major scandal if they have a system where they mark somebody as a problem applicant just because they exercise their right to file a lawsuit. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I wouldn't have any way to know this, but I think that would be a major scandal, and that could be one of those, news reports about leaks that apparently the asylum offices had this, criterias that they were categorizing applicants as problem applicant whom they retaliate against. That could be a basis for a major lawsuit, and that applicant may have a basis for having their case reconsidered, or being a victim of criminal activity by this asylum office. That would be criminal for them to mark a client as a problem applicant because they filed a lawsuit. That's just my opinion. So there might be a civil suit against the USCIS for doing that. But thank you, everyone, again, for listening. Please press like to like this video. Please subscribe to our channel. Again, please follow us, follow my live streams on Thursdays, and next live stream is going to be next Thursday at 5 p.m. Washington, D.C. and New York time. It's Eastern U.S. time, 5 p.m. next Thursday and the Thursday after. I will try to keep this as consistent as possible. If you have any follow-up questions, let me know. And if you have friends, relatives, somebody you know who is planning to apply for asylum or has an immigration case and they have questions, maybe they're kind of shy to schedule a consultation with an immigration lawyer directly, they want to talk briefly, or they have some kind of question that can be asked publicly in general through chat, please share this link with that individual. You'll see lots of videos on our channel. There are very useful videos, not necessarily live streams, but a lot of videos with the topics specifically where I describe, immigration procedures, the requirements, how to apply, how to answer questions, steps in asylum cases, and so on. So some of that may be very useful. And we have in our channel a animated video about actually asylum process, which is very famous, very popular. I've been contacted by some universities, some professors, some organizations asking if they can share that video because it's helpful. It kind of tells you in an animated way how to apply for asylum in the US and what are the steps involved. So again, please subscribe to our channel, hit like. I'll let you guys go and you guys let me go. Thank you very much and have a good night. Bye-bye.